The waning of the pleasant day into a brisk evening on Wall Street in Lower Manhattan did not stand out as exceptional on August 28th of 1859. The soothingly familiar sound of New Yorkers wrapping up their Sundays was merely ambient noise to most of its inhabitants as they moved through their routines without a single thought to the night sky above them. Vermont farmers, with the gloaming heavily upon them, threw slop to their hogs, checked in on their livestock one final time, and headed inside for the remainder of their evenings. In Cleveland, Ohio, and Washington, D.C., the twilight arrived without fanfare, as individuals attended to their chores and prepared to begin the work week, oblivious to the canopy of stars that were appearing above their homes. In Cape Otway, Australia, where they had raced ahead 15 hours to get to August 29th before the U.S., the evening had just begun to drop its curtain on the day without incidents, and sailors aboard their ships on the open sea simply made note of the brilliance and precocious winking of the stars in the otherwise moonless night before continuing on with their nightly rituals. Though no one was yet aware, this seemingly innocuous night sky was about to take everyone beneath her watchful gaze by surprise with a dramatic display that was anything but ordinary. At approximately 6:30-ish, a bright glow could be observed along the horizon and behind the northern mountains of the eastern United States. Concern gradually began to spread as folks gathered to watch what appeared to be a magnificent fire raging just out of sight as it filled the skyline with an unearthly light. Neighbors congregated in the streets, front yards, and parks to discuss the perceived impending disaster, and local firemen dressed hastily, uncertain when they might be called to join in the fight against the out-of-control blaze. Meanwhile, in New York City, crowds gathered in wonder, alarmed by the visage of the illuminated blood-red sky that was soon streaked with pulsating arrows of dancing lights. The spectacle was first contained between the horizon and the zenith, but as the numbers of observers increased, so did the area which the phenomenon covered, until the entire heaven was lit by the eeriest of light shows. The Boston sky was overarched with an oscillating glow, which changed from spectral green to tortured red, and then back again in waves broken only by piercing spires of light in different hues. The luminescent fountains shot up across the northern horizon with a violent undulating beauty and a visual bombardment that was incongruent with the absolute silence that accompanied it. These merry dancers continued to entertain and leave their vast earthly audience enraptured, and in some cases fearful, until the early morning hours when the night finally dropped her curtain on the celestial performance. The unusualness of the evening's events lay not in its having occurred at all, but rather in the locations where it was able to be witnessed. The Aurora Borealis and the Aurora Australis, which were so familiar to the northern regions, were not only untimely, but had reached far beyond their normal boundaries, stretching with wispy fingers down into the tropics and unleashing an ethereal splendor. And while delighted individuals headed off in bemusement to get a little rest in the early hours of the morning of the 29th, they couldn't have dreamed that this bit of brilliant theatrics was only the initial shot notched and aimed by the sun across the Earth's bow as summer proceeded to go out with a bang. What would follow was a geomagnetic storm so extreme that it would change the solar perception and its relationship with the Earth's magnetic field, all the while stamping the historic timeline with a scientifically measurable incident deemed to be the largest event of its kind to have struck the Earth in recorded history, and which would become known simply as the Carrington Event.
It was of extraordinary brilliance. The eastern sky appeared of a blood-red color. There was a ghastly splendor over the horizon of the north. The sea reflected the phenomenon, and no one could look at it without thinking of the passage in the Bible which says, "The sea was turned to blood." An eyewitness account in the Charleston Mercury. Cincinnati Daily Commercial, August 29th, 1859. September 1859.
Please consider taking a moment to like our video, and if you haven't already, subscribing to our channel, as it all helps us continue to grow. While newspapers across the world splashed first-hand observations of the aurora across their front pages, Noting erratic eruptions and communications over telegraph wires, the well-known astronomer Richard Carrington was conscientiously studying and recording solar activity daily, and he was keeping his trained eye on the sun from his country estate outside London. From his home observatory at Redhill, Reigate, Surrey, he would be the first individual to witness and record a solar flare. Well, almost the first. He would actually share this honor with his fellow from the Royal Astronomical Society, or RAS, Richard Hodgson. At 11:18 on the morning of September 1st, Carrington witnessed two patches of intensely bright and white light erupting from a large sunspot he had been observing through his brass telescope, which was outfitted with dark filters specific to this pursuit. Simultaneously, across London at Claybury in Essex at Hawkwood Estate, amateur astronomer Richard Hodgson had also witnessed the approximately 5-minute-long event. Both men raced excitedly to share their findings with their peers, sketches and notes in hand. The large coronal mass ejection, or CME, spewed solar magnetized plasma from the sun's corona and walloped Earth's magnetosphere with a punch of subatomic charged electrons, protons, and some heavier ions, in a blow containing the energy of approximately 10 billion atomic bombs. Under normal circumstances, such a CME would be expected to interact with Earth's magnetic field approximately 2 or 3 days after the initial flare. However, in the case of the Carrington event, the supersonic blast traveled at a velocity of 90 million miles to knock on Earth's door in a mere 17 hours and 45 minutes, an uninvited guest that no one was really prepared for. Due to the previous storm on the 28th, which acted as a sort of trailblazer, allowing the CME on the 2nd to find less resistance along its journey, energy estimated to have been equivalent to 10 to the 35th power in electron volts collided with the Earth's protective magnetosphere, distorting and bombarding it with a flux of highly charged particles, creating the cascade of electrifying events which would follow. Many of the 125,000 miles of telegraph lines running throughout North America, Australia, India, and Europe had been rudely disrupted by the first solar storm on August 28th, with conducting wires erupting into sparks and the lines under the influence of the strong auroras becoming completely useless for transmitting messages. The New Orleans Bee rushed to report that the lines between Louisville, New York, and all throughout Canada were interrupted by the unusual overcharge of electricity which always pervades the atmosphere during the continuance of this phenomenon. But where the first storm of August 28th had been a fascinating, if not frustrating, experience for the telegram operators, what transpired on September 2nd as the powerful blast of plasma and solar magnetic field pierced the Earth's teardrop-shaped magnetic field, exciting the molecules of oxygen and nitrogen in the upper atmosphere, illuminating them in red and green, while flooding more energy into the system than was leaving, was orders of magnitude stranger. With the energetically saturated auroras taking full control of the telegraph wires, operators who were fighting to transmit messages longer than 2 words unplugged their galvanic batteries for safety and mysteriously found themselves working in conjunction with the auroral current instead of against it, sending and receiving messages with ease. The Times-Picayune observed that the wires to which no batteries were attached hummed with electrical activity, a phenomenon difficult to explain, while the operators of the National Telegraph Office in Washington City, seeing that their wires were possessed seemingly by earth currents, went to work transmitting messages between New York and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, without any issue, and also entirely without the use of batteries. However, as one might expect with the amount of energy flowing through the wires, there were several reports of injuries incurred when the operators, unaware of the severity of the electrical storm, received varying degrees of burns and shocks. One particularly dramatic example was retold by Frederick Royce, an operator in Washington, D.C., whose forehead grazed a ground wire, causing an arc of fire to leap between his head and the sounder, which was observed by his fellow operator. The young man received an extreme electrical shock which left him momentarily stunned and burned. At the beginning of the event, operators working on the American Telegraph line, communicating between Boston and Portland, quickly began to work out what was happening and how to handle the inconvenience.
Please cut off your battery entirely from the line for 15 minutes.
Will do so. It's now disconnected.
Mine is disconnected, and we are working with the auroral current. How do you receive my writing?
Better than with our batteries on. Current comes and goes gradually.
My current is very strong at times, and we can work better without batteries, as the aurora seems to neutralize and augment our batteries alternately, making current too strong at times for our relay magnets. Suppose we work without batteries while we are affected by this trouble.
Very well. Shall I go ahead with business?
Yes, go ahead.
The operators continued to work exclusively on the aurora for approximately 2 hours. Across the world, the heavenly spectacle of the September 2nd storm exceeded those of the first, lighting up the sky so brilliantly that miners sleeping beneath the stars in the Rocky Mountains mistook midnight for dawn and were most of the way through cooking breakfast and enjoying their coffee before realizing that something was amiss. On the East Coast, reports of newspapers and watch faces being easily read in the middle of the night were noted alongside descriptions of a sky illuminated as if on fire or covered in a brilliant web making up a tapestry woven with silken threads of spectral white light. Some suspected the lights to be premonitions of an impending war, famine, or pestilence, while the San Francisco Herald bemoaned the entire affair, declaring the appearance at 11:30 to have been positively dreadful, with its red glare drenching houses, streets, and fields in its eerie glow. Way down south, New Orleans' Daily Picayune reported that those auspicious residents of the Garden District who could ordinarily imbibe large quantities of alcohol without batting an eye or losing their balance or faculties were found lounging stone-cold drunk in the gutters, a circumstance they presumed was a result of being under the influence of the electrically saturated sky. And in perhaps the most eyebrow-raising and yet utterly southern accounting, a fastidious gentleman whose sleep was disturbed around 1 a.m. by the cheerful songs of waking larks outside his window apparently put an unfortunate and rather permanent end to their melody before they could reach the second stanza, killing 3 of the birds with his gun before presumably heading back to bed, though arguably this story would have been far more compelling had the deed been done with a single stone. While the initial solar flare Carrington and Hodgson witnessed in 1859 lasted only 5 minutes, the resulting geomagnetic storm, once it arrived, penetrated the Earth's magnetosphere rather than being directed away along the Earth's magnetic field lines, and continued for several days. At the Kew Observatory in London, magnetic sensors picked up incredible magnetic disturbances on Earth between August 28th and September 7th of 1859. And while the Carrington Event, widely considered the most severe geomagnetic storm ever recorded, resulted in widespread disruption of fledgling technology at the time, coupled with luminous waves of auroras that wandered down into unfamiliar territory, scientists warn a similar event occurring today in our advanced and globally interconnected, hyper-technology-dependent culture would be devastating. Potential impacts on our critical infrastructure have been examined and presented before Congress in the U.S., and they paint a concerning picture for humanity should we be subjected to another Carrington-type event. Exceptional damage sustained by satellites would be a given, with electronic failures induced by powerful increases in radiation and currents, or atmospheric drag, sending vulnerable satellites plummeting from their orbits and potentially burning up in the atmosphere, as happened in 2022 after a CME when 40 newly launched SpaceX Starlink satellites were lost. While a mere 1% of the world's internet traffic is linked to satellites, ATM credit card transactions, transferences of funds, and banking in general are all transmitted via satellite, putting our monetary system in the crosshairs of de-evolution should the sun get any big ideas. With the absence of the satellites comes a loss of capability for monitoring weather and the reduction of communication as well as impact of navigational systems. Communication between systems would be disabled, causing chaos across industries and governments, and radiation levels at altitude, as well as lack of communication and navigation capabilities, would ground air traffic and other forms of transportation, particularly newer, highly computerized versions. Supply chains would come to a grinding halt, and local connectivity would become imperative. Beside the effects on humans, researchers have discovered that animals that depend on the magnetic field lines of Earth to navigate commonly run into disastrous situations when geomagnetic storms occur, and the entire lot from gray whales to sea turtles and birds often end up confused and disoriented by finding themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. Further affected would be the energy grid, which relies heavily on high-voltage transformers to move 60 to 70% of U.S. electricity around the country quickly and efficiently. And with electricity demands already outpacing availability, any insults to the grid through geomagnetic-induced currents, inevitably leading to overheating and failure of transformers, has the very real potential of disconnecting the U.S. from modernity in an unforgiving blink of an eye. The current solar cycle 25, which began in 2019, is now approaching solar maximum, displaying the usual peaking of sunspot activity and the increase of space weather, which will be followed by a flip of the sun's magnetic field, with the North Pole changing its polarity from positive to negative, and the South Pole casting off its negativity and gaining a positive outlook, a dance that makes up the 11-year solar cycle. During this period of solar maximum, rare solar events become the norm, adding descriptives such as polar vortex, plasma waterfalls, and solar tornadoes to the vernacular, and all of these indicate that the sun is getting pretty heated. Scientists are loosely predicting that July 2025 will witness the sun flipping out and a beginning of a decrease in solar activity until it reaches its new low sometime in the early 2030s. But until then, we can expect some dramatic mood swings directed at us by the sun. In Carrington's day, telegraph operators could surf the aurora borealis with their messages sans batteries and easily replace wooden telegraph poles and run wire where they were burned. By contrast, today's cold plunge into AI tech, hooking all our wagons to a technological current dependent on the sun either being on its best behavior at all times or our understanding of and capability to harden our critical infrastructure against her whims, requires being on point and carefully monitoring all solar weather. So that's exactly what NASA and others are continuing to do, as they use a complex network of satellites and spacecraft, such as the Advanced Composition Explorer, or ACE, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Deep Space Climate Observatory, to monitor the sun's activity and the solar winds in real time. NASA uses models to refine their ability to predict both the intensity and the path of the solar storms, allowing them to send crucial information and alerts to power plants and the Federal Emergency Management Agency in a timely manner to facilitate steps being taken to protect critical infrastructure. NASA's storm predicting model, referred to as DAGGR, uses OpenAI to analyze the tremendous amount of data collected from satellites and spacecraft to formulate increasingly accurate scenarios and identify potential solar storm impact locations, allowing for those on the ground to have the much-needed time to prepare. In collaboration with the U.S. Geological Survey and the Department of Energy, among others, NASA and NOAA are able to create a sort of solar shield to minimize critical infrastructure damage and alert the public to take necessary precautions. Building resilience is the key to withstanding and recovering from an unexpected and sudden crisis in any system. Our ability to thrive under every circumstance is directly correlated with our level of resilience. Fear reduces our brain's ability to handle information correctly. It increases our impulsivity and emotional dysregulation and leaves us in a vulnerable and frankly desperate state, which makes being prepared for emergencies on an individual level the smartest and healthiest course of action, as very few great decisions are ever made under the influence of an anxious and reactive mind. Taking steps to create emergency plans with your family or close friends, including strategies for getting home or agreeing on a designated meeting place, are good places to start with your planning. Packing a get-home bag for your vehicle that includes warm clothes and emergency blankets, comfortable shoes, socks, water, snacks, first aid, etc., will help give you peace of mind when you or your loved ones are on the road. Having emergency radio communication devices or landline telephones will help keep you connected and apprised of any new developments related to your situation. A binder filled with plastic sleeves containing vital documents and important information for everyone in your family is both critical and handy in the case of evacuation, and is useful at any other time as well. Developing relationships locally, growing food, investing in gravity water filtration systems and portable filters, as well as having a reasonable buffer in resources. Having a solar-powered generator or battery, usable skills, and access to knowledge in the form of printed books are just some practical ways to harden your own family's systems and contribute to the well-being of our communities in case of an emergency. Something those who live in the states affected by natural disasters are all too familiar with. And attending to these things during uneventful times will reduce the anxiety of the unknown when or if it hits, as you've already mitigated for what you can, giving you that much-needed sense of peace in the midst of the storms of life. As the little ant of Aesop fame was aware, it pays to put in the work of preparing in the balmy days of summer so that when winter arrives, and it always does in some form or another, we don't find ourselves more like the frolicking grasshopper facing a bitter reality of our own making. Researchers assure us they're doubtful we'll face something as destructive as the Carrington Event in the current solar cycle, but others are less certain. Either way, we figure it's always better to be safer than sorry, particularly when dealing with a moody ball of swirling nuclear energy. What we also know is that the human spirit is remarkable, and hope springs eternal, with innovation and imagination following closely behind. No matter what nonsense the natural world throws at us, there will always be those who rise out of seemingly impossible circumstances and losses and use that moment to reimagine the future. Individuals who are determined to not just be survivors, but to thrive. We hope that you found today's video informative, and if you have, that you'll consider letting us know by hitting the like button and even subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. Now, go stock up on a few things. Plant some seeds, learn a relevant skill, find a library sale or a used bookstore, and buy a book or 20, and go spend a little time basking in the warm rays of the sun. That same energy that has the potential to overwhelm a grid also gently ripens a tomato to perfection and warms your skin, directing every mechanism in your body down to the atomic level. Thanks for watching today, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.